Welcome to Chronicles of Old Tales. It wasn't enough to just kill her. That straightforward act of extinguishing a life, however brutal, would have been too simple, too merciful for the purposes of the frenzied Parisian mob. It wasn't even enough to tear her body to pieces in a public street, turning her into a bloody spectacle of revolutionary rage. No, the true objective was something far more twisted, a meticulously calculated act of psychological cruelty designed to utterly and completely break a queen. In the heart of a Paris consumed by paranoia and bloodlust, a mob had a message for Marie Antoinette, and they were grimly resolved to deliver it directly to her, face to face. They hoisted the severed head of her most loyal, most devoted friend onto the sharpened point of a pike and dragged it through the filth-strewn streets of the capital. This was no longer just a disorganized rabble. It had transformed into a grotesque procession, a macabre parade of death marching inexorably toward the grim medieval fortress where the queen was held captive. The act transcended mere murder. It had been elevated, or rather, debased, into a sophisticated and brutal piece of psychological warfare. The singular, horrifying goal was to compel the queen to gaze upon the blood-matted, disfigured remains of her most cherished confidant. They wanted her to see, to truly and viscerally comprehend the unbridled hatred that was aimed squarely at her and the throne she represented. They wanted her to know, in the deepest, most terrified recesses of her soul, that the same monstrous fate was coiled and ready to strike, waiting for her. This is the story of how an unwavering, almost saintly loyalty led to one of the most savage and deeply symbolic assassinations of the entire French Revolution. It is the story of how a princess's head, impaled on a pike, was transformed into a terrifying warning, a symbol of revolutionary fury so potent and so horrific that its echo would reverberate through the annals of history. Long before the blood-soaked pikes and the ravenous mobs, there was the gilded universe of Versailles, a breathtaking world of shimmering silks, mirrored halls, and whispered treacheries. And at the glittering, often profoundly lonely heart of this world was the deep and abiding friendship between a queen and a princess. Marie-Therese Louise of Savoy was born into the esteemed Italian nobility, a daughter of the ancient house of Savoy. Her destiny, however, was not to be found in the palazzos of Turin, but in France, woven with threads of both unparalleled splendor and unimaginable doom. At the tender age of just 17, she was married by proxy to the Prince de Lamballe, a kinsman of the French king himself, a union that immediately thrust her into the very epicenter of European power, intrigue, and social expectation. Her grand entry into the highest echelons of French society was almost immediately marked by a swift and brutal tragedy. The marriage, though initially described as a happy one, was tragically brief. Her husband, Louis Alexander, was a man given to debauchery, and just over a year after their wedding, he died, likely from a venereal disease, leaving her a wealthy and childless widow at the age of 18, alone in a foreign court. Her first instinct was to retreat from the world and join a convent, but her devoted father-in-law, the immensely wealthy and respected Duc de Penthièvre, persuaded her to remain at court, where she lived a quiet life, often focused on charitable works. But her life, far from being over, was only just beginning a new chapter. In 1770, the young, vibrant Austrian Archduchess Marie Antoinette arrived in France to marry the Dauphin, the future Louis XVI. She found the court at Versailles to be a beautiful but cold and treacherous place, a nest of vipers where friendship was a commodity and loyalty a weakness to be mercilessly exploited. In the quiet, gentle, and deeply sincere Princess de Lamballe, Marie Antoinette discovered something she desperately needed and had struggled to find: a true, disinterested friend. Their bond became the stuff of legend at Versailles. Marie Antoinette, known for her sometimes frivolous and vivacious personality, found an anchor in Lamballe's steady, calming presence. Contemporaries noted Lamballe was extremely pretty, gentle, and agreeable, though she possessed little wit of her own, instead reflecting the opinions of those she admired. The queen's affection was profound and open. She once reportedly told her husband, "Ah, sire, the Princess de Lamballe's friendship is the charm of my life." In 1775, to formalize this bond and ensure her friend would always be near, the queen bestowed upon Lamballe the immensely prestigious and powerful position of superintendent of the queen's household. This was not a merely ceremonial role. It was the highest-ranking position for a lady-in-waiting at the entire court, a post that had been left vacant for over 30 years because of its power and expense. The superintendent controlled all access to the queen, supervised her vast staff, managed her correspondence, had the power to hire and fire, and settled all disputes within the household. New members of the household had to swear an oath of service to her. It was a position of enormous influence and came with a staggering salary. But for Lamballe, the true prize was the constant proximity it granted her to the friend she adored. While other court friendships proved notoriously fickle, Lamballe's devotion was absolute and unwavering. This stood in stark contrast to the queen's other famous friendship with the dazzling and ambitious Duchess de Polignac. The Polignac family reaped enormous financial rewards and titles from their connection to the queen, building a powerful faction at court before fleeing France at the first sign of real trouble. Lamballe, by contrast, was not a political schemer or a purveyor of court gossip. By nearly all accounts, she was a woman of quiet dignity, profound sensitivity, and an almost incomprehensible loyalty. Her anchor in the swirling, treacherous sea of courtly scandals and political intrigue was her unwavering service and devotion to the queen. And it was precisely this loyalty, so admired in the golden, sun-drenched days of the monarchy, that would ultimately seal her horrific fate, condemning her to a death that stood as a chilling testament to the revolution's violent descent into madness. When the French Revolution ignited with the storming of the Bastille in 1789, the opulent, predictable world the princess had known for 2 decades vanished in a storm of fire and fury. The attack on the medieval fortress was not just a riot. It was a full frontal assault on the very concept of absolute monarchy, an institution long believed to be divinely ordained. A palpable panic gripped the aristocracy. One by one, the lords and ladies who had once orbited the queen like planets around the sun began to break away, fleeing the country for the relative safety of England, Germany, and Switzerland. They saw the writing on the wall, and they understood it was being written in blood. By 1791, the Princess de Lamballe was herself abroad, having taken up residence in the civilized and comparatively safe haven of Bath, England, a world away from the escalating chaos in Paris. Here, surrounded by friends and fellow émigrés, she was secure. Her family and allies implored her to stay. The news from France was growing more dire by the day. The royal family was no longer the master of Versailles, but was under virtual house arrest in the Tuileries Palace in Paris, their every move watched. To return to such a volatile environment was not just a risk. It was to willingly walk into the heart of a raging inferno. Marie Antoinette herself, deeply concerned for her friend's safety, wrote to her, urging her to remain in England. In one letter from October 1791, the Queen wrote, "I am broken-hearted at what I see passing around me, and can only entreat you not to come back. The present moment is too terrible. I do not, therefore, wish you to expose yourself uselessly to danger." But then came a formal, official letter that would change everything. Under the new, revolutionary constitution, the Queen's household was to be legally reorganized, and a law dictated that all office holders not in active service were to be dismissed and their positions forfeited. Marie Antoinette was forced to write to Lamballe, presenting her with a stark and formal choice. Either return to your post as superintendent or formally resign the position for life. For the Princess de Lamballe, this was no choice at all. Faced with the dilemma of abandoning her friend and queen in her darkest hour or facing near certain danger at her side, her decision was as immediate as it was resolute. She reportedly declared, with a chilling sense of finality, "I must live and die with her." She quickly settled her affairs in England. In a moment of grim foresight that revealed her clear understanding of the peril she faced, she wrote her will, thoroughly convinced that she was marching towards her own death. She then turned her back on the tranquility and safety of Great Britain and began the perilous journey back to Paris. Her return was an act of almost unbelievable loyalty in an era when self-preservation had become the ruling passion of the French nobility. She resumed her duties at the Tuileries Palace, re-entering the claustrophobic, paranoid world of the captive royals. There, she tried to maintain a sliver of normalcy and dignity for the beleaguered queen she loved, hosting small gatherings and providing a familiar, comforting presence. She knew the immense danger. She understood, with absolute clarity, that by tying her fate so inextricably to the queen's, she was likely signing her own death warrant. But for the Princess de Lamballe, a life of comfortable exile, purchased at the price of abandoning her friend, was a fate far worse than death. It was a courageous, selfless, and ultimately fatal choice. She had sealed her fate. The only question that remained was how, and when, the revolutionaries would exact their terrible price. August 10th, 1792. This date marks the death rattle of the French monarchy. A massive, heavily armed mob, whipped into a frenzy by radical orators like Georges Danton and supported by the newly formed insurrectionary commune, stormed the Tuileries Palace. The palace's last defenders, primarily the Swiss Guard, were massacred in a brutal, no-quarter fight that left hundreds of guardsmen and revolutionaries dead. The French monarchy, which had stood for 1,000 years, was effectively erased in a single day of horrific bloodshed. King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and their children were stripped of their remaining titles and taken into custody as common criminals. And standing right there beside them throughout the ordeal, a pillar of calm in the hurricane of violence, offering her unwavering solidarity, was the Princess de Lamballe. They were all imprisoned together in the Temple, a grim medieval fortress in Paris whose thick stone walls were as cold and unforgiving as the hearts of their revolutionary captors. But even this small comfort of shared captivity was to be short-lived. On the 19th of August, in a deliberate act of cruelty and to further isolate the royal family, Lamballe was separated from them. She was transferred to La Force prison, a notoriously dark, damp, and terrifying place known for its harsh conditions and overcrowded cells. The prison complex was divided into sections, with La Grande Force for men and La Petite Force for women. It was here, in this squalid and foreboding environment, among common criminals and prostitutes, that the princess would await her fate. In the first days of September, a new and virulent wave of paranoia swept through Paris. With a Prussian army marching on the city to restore the monarchy, radical leaders like Danton and Jean-Paul Marat spread terrifying rumors of a prison plot. They claimed, without any concrete evidence, that the thousands of inmates locked in Paris's prisons, nobles, priests, political prisoners, and common criminals alike, were secretly plotting to break out, slaughter the patriots of Paris, and join the invading enemy. The solution they argued for, and which they incited, was a preemptive slaughter. This ignited the September Massacres, a 5-day orgy of violence where mobs, often led by National Guardsmen and provincial fighters, moved from prison to prison, dragging out inmates and butchering them in the streets. It was a citywide bloodbath that claimed between 1,100 and 1,400 lives, with the majority being non-political prisoners. On September 3rd, the mob came for La Force. The Princess de Lamballe was dragged from her cell, pale and trembling, and hauled before a makeshift tribunal set up in the prison courtyard. These were not legal proceedings. They were hastily assembled kangaroo courts, where so-called judges, their hands and clothes often stained with the blood of previous victims, delivered chilling ultimatums. She was ordered to swear an oath, to love liberty and equality, and to swear hatred to the king and the queen. According to multiple historical accounts, she faced her accusers with a preternatural calm. She calmly agreed to the first part of the oath, a pledge to liberty and equality. But she could not, go further. "The second I cannot swear," she replied, her voice steady despite the terror surrounding her. "It is not in my heart." She explained simply that she had no personal reason to hate the royal family. They had only ever shown her kindness. Some around her, perhaps even a few of the judges moved by her dignity, begged her to just say the words, to lie, and save her own life. She refused. One of the tribunal's leaders, seeing that her will would not be broken, gave the fatal, deceptively simple command that served as an instant death sentence. Eminez Madame asterisk, or take Madame away. Take Madame away was the prearranged signal. It meant the prisoner had been condemned by the mob's justice. The moment Princess de Lamballe was pushed out from the relative safety of the tribunal into the prison courtyard, a space already piled high with mutilated bodies and slick with blood, the waiting mob descended upon her. The first blow was from a man with a pike, who struck her on the back of the head, knocking off her cap and causing her long blonde hair to tumble down. Before she could even cry out, they swarmed her, a whirlwind of hate-fueled violence, hacking and stabbing her to death with pikes, sabers, and other crude weapons. Her ordeal was swift, a brutal, merciless end in a courtyard that had been transformed into an open-air abattoir. What happened in the minutes and hours that followed is a stomach-churning blend of confirmed historical horror and sensationalist, almost ghoulish legend. Her body was stripped of its clothing and grotesquely mutilated. Her head was severed from her body and mounted on a pike. This much is historically certain and was witnessed by multiple sources. Over the centuries, however, anti-revolutionary propaganda and sensationalist accounts have added layers of almost unbelievable barbarity. Lurid stories of cannibalism, the tearing out of her heart, and other horrific acts of desecration. For example, Count Axel von Fersen, a close friend of the Queen, wrote an account filled with claims of prolonged torture, though he was not in Paris at the time. Most modern historians argue that these most extreme details were likely fabrications designed to demonize the revolutionaries and portray them as inhuman monsters. An official record made later that day noted her headless body was brought to a local administrative office and inventoried the items in her pockets, suggesting her clothes were still on the corpse at that point. The controversy over the exact nature of her mutilation only highlights the chaos and brutality of the moment, where the lines between righteous fury and monstrous cruelty were irrevocably blurred. Her head, its once meticulously powdered blonde hair now matted with blood and grime, was then carried to a nearby barber. Under threats of death, the barber was forced to wash and curl the hair, a macabre effort to make the victim more recognizable for the horror that was to come. Some reports even state the head was taken to a nearby cafe and placed before customers, who were told to drink to her death. Then, the true, chilling purpose of the murder was set into motion. The mob, now a grotesque parade of the damned, set off through the streets of Paris. Their destination, the Temple prison. They had a message for Marie Antoinette, and they were grimly determined to deliver it personally. The mob surged through the streets of Paris, a drunken, chanting sea of people holding their horrific trophy aloft for all to see. It was a procession of unimaginable terror, a visceral warning to any who still harbored sympathies for the old regime. Their destination was the Temple, and their goal was singular: to confront the Queen with the ghastly proof of their revolutionary power. Inside the prison, the royal family could hear the growing roar of the crowd, a sound that promised nothing but doom. The guards initially tried to keep them at bay, but the mob was insistent, their demands growing louder and more violent. They wanted the Queen. They wanted the Austrian to show herself and look upon the fate of her favorite. Gathering directly beneath her window, they waved the pike, its gruesome burden a clear and undeniable statement. Jean-Baptiste Clary, the king's loyal valet, saw the head and described it. Though bloody, it was not disfigured. Her blonde hair, still curling, floated around the pike. The guards, perhaps out of a twisted sense of cruelty or in a desperate attempt to placate the raging crowd, urged the Queen to go to the window and look out. King Louis XVI, however, intervened. He physically held her back, preventing her from witnessing the full, unmitigated horror that awaited her gaze. It was at that moment that a municipal officer, with brutal frankness, told her the truth of the commotion. It was the head of the Princess de Lamballe they were trying to show her. According to the accounts of her daughter, Marie-Therese, upon hearing those devastating words, Marie Antoinette was frozen with horror before she collapsed to the floor in a dead faint. She never saw her friend's head. She didn't have to. The psychological blow had landed with a force more powerful than any physical weapon. The message had been brutally and successfully delivered. The mob had achieved its ultimate goal. They hadn't just murdered the Queen's most loyal and devoted friend. They had weaponized her remains to inflict the maximum possible psychological torment. The act was a chilling declaration. No one associated with the monarchy was safe, no matter how beloved or apolitical. The hatred for the crown ran so deep that it would not just kill, but desecrate the bodies of even its most devoted followers. The horrifying parade of the princess's head on a pike became an infamous and enduring symbol of the revolution's descent into unchecked, nihilistic violence. A moment so profoundly dark that it shocked a city that was rapidly growing numb to the daily sight of bloodshed. The story of the Princess de Lamballe is a chilling, heartbreaking examination of the absolute extremes of both human loyalty and human hatred. Her life and death serve as a grim reminder that behind the grand, sweeping political movements of history, there are always deeply personal stories, stories of profound friendship, of unimaginable sacrifice, and of a cruelty that defies easy comprehension. The verified facts of her death are horrific enough on their own. She was a woman whose only crime was a steadfast and profound loyalty to her friend. For that, she was delivered to a mob to be torn apart in the street. Her story is a testament to the savagery that is unleashed when political ideology curdles into mob violence, and when human beings are reduced to mere symbols to be destroyed. The controversy and myths that have swirled around her final moments for over 2 centuries only underscore the terror of an era where truth itself became a casualty of the conflict. The head of the princess on a pike was not just a message to a queen. It was a message to the world about the terrifying cost of revolution, a cost that is always paid in blood, in dignity, and in the very soul of a nation. If you found this glimpse into one of the French Revolution's darkest chapters compelling, please consider subscribing to Chronicles of Old Tales for more stories that explore the forgotten and often terrifying corners of history.